And welcome back to Game Escape, here today to return to the world of Yakuza 5 and discuss the minigames. Now, as I mentioned in my review, there are a ton of minigames, and some are really fun, some are not that great, but they are an integral part of what makes this game, and really all of the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 2 Yakuza games, wonderful. There is just so much to do. And so many of these games are culturally specific to Japan that, you can't play them here in the States in any kind of substantive way, at least in video game form. So I think it's worth looking at these games. I'm not going to do sort of a top 10 list, but simply show you a night out in Yakuza, finish the game, and just wanted to go and try to find as many minigames as I could throughout all of the cities in the game. Now, I will say that I've played this since. You always discover more. There's always something to do. There's always someone tucked away in the corner of the world who will introduce a new game to you. So this is just my night out, and it's going to be me offering you some mini reviews of the mini games in Yakuza 5. Alright, first game up is Mahjong, and you know that I had to talk about this first, and had to play this first on my little romp around the world of Yakuza 5, because I am a huge fan of Mahjong, and this is actually one of the best kind of introductory Mahjong games that you can play here in the United States. It is great for novice players. They have different tables, easy, medium, hard. They have tournaments, and even better, they explain a lot of the rules. And in this version of Yakuza, in a really detailed guide. So if you ever wanted to know how to play Japanese Mahjong, this is a great place to start. I'm not going to lie and say that it's easy. No, this is an intimidating game to learn, but this is one of the best ways to learn it. Now, you're going to lose, maybe your first 3 or 4 games before you get the hang of it, but it is really, really well done. Again, it's not going to appeal to everyone, so I can't tell you that this is definitively the best game in the collection of minigames here, but it is really a standout version of Mahjong. Sticking within the Japanese gambling scene, we have Pachinko, and I've talked about Pachinko games here on the channel. They're not really great video games because they don't require much of the player. You typically choose from a variety of 1 or 2 of the same machines. Different machines will have different odds. They'll be at sort of different stages in their playtime. It's a long story. You can check out my Pachinko video. But basically, you want to get a Pachinko machine that hasn't been played a lot over the course of say a 10-hour time period. But anyway, here I'm not sure that they're dealing with that. Basically, sit down in the machine, put your money in, turn the wheel, hope that something good happens. Because of that, it is not great. If you like the idea behind Pachinko, it can get kind of in a trance, just looking at this machine and waiting for something good to happen. You can play the Virtua Fighter machine. You can play. They have like a Middle Eastern Aladdin-themed machine, but you're just turning, watching, not doing much of anything, and because of that, it is not a great minigame. Now, hands down, one of the best aspects of all of these PS3 Yakuza games is being able to go to an arcade, a Sega Game Center. And here in Yakuza 5, you can do a couple of different things. You have Taiko no Tatsujin, you have Virtua Fighter, and you have a shooting game, plus a photo booth and a UFO catcher. And all of these games are tremendously fun. So we're going to look at Taiko no Tatsujin first. And as you guys know, I'm not a big fan of rhythm games, but, this was surprisingly fun. I just set it to easy just to grab some footage here. But some catchy tunes, and basically all of the buttons on the PS3 gamepad correspond to, I guess the face buttons are a drum beat, and the L and R buttons are kind of like beating the rim of the drum. So you see that with blue, and you just kind of try to build this meter at the top, and that's how you win the game. Again, I didn't really put much work into this because I'm really terrible at the higher difficulties. But yeah, I think it's cool that you have a Namco game here in Yakuza 5, which is put out by Sega. Now, the gem of the arcade is Virtua Fighter 2. Yes, you can play a fully functional, arcade-perfect Virtua Fighter 2, and it's just wonderful to do. I'm so happy Sega put this in here. Now, in the Japanese version, I believe it had online connectivity and leaderboards, which was really tremendous. I guess the only issue that holds this game back is that, you have to play it on the PS3 gamepad, and it has been so long since I've played Virtua Fighter with a gamepad. I was kind of rusty. But, I'm going to come out and say, this is obviously the best minigame in the game, because it's one of the best arcade games, one of the best fighters of all time, in my opinion. So how could I not say that this, isn't the best? It's clearly the best. But of course that might be a little cheap because, it wasn't a minigame specifically designed for Yakuza. Nonetheless, blast to play. The different cities have different difficulty levels available. The one I'm in is on, I guess, the toughest setting, so I'm not doing all that well, but it was still manageable, so I don't know if this is quite like the arcade setting, which I remember being really, really tough. Nonetheless, always fun to go into Club Sega and play some Virtua Fighter 2. Next up is a shooter, and I am really not overly familiar with this. It's called Gunrhein, and my guess is this was designed specifically for this game. I've never heard of it before. It feels to a degree like a dual-stick shooter, but basically you're part of this honeycomb cluster, and you can shoot in one direction. And you press the X button, you sort of branch off another part of the honeycomb, which is another ship. So you can kind of try to shoot in a 360-degree pattern and take out these enemies as they fly around you. They will try to fly in and destroy the honeycomb, which forces you to use your reflexes and break off a piece right before they make their attack. It's fairly entertaining. It's fairly challenging as you progress through it, but, not a great shooter per se. I would have liked to have seen something in Shenmue where you could play Hang On, or just another classic Sega arcade game. Nonetheless, interesting and worth a play. Then I went to the bowling alley here in Kamurocho, and bowling is, I think, one of the better games. It truly is a lot of fun. And it has one of the better minigame mechanics that you'll see here. Basically, you're deciding on a ball type. You are just picking the angle, and then you're putting some spin on the ball so you can, sort of curve it into the pins, depending on what your launch angle is. It just works, and as you play through it, this is fairly early on in my bowling experience, but as I kind of went through the bowling minigame, it was fun. You can invite different people to play with you. You meet different people at the alley and stuff like that. So, a perfectly fun minigame and definitely worth checking out. Another one of my favorites is the batting cages. There's just something about the Yakuza batting cage minigame that's fun. It seems to run at a higher frame rate. It has this cool slow motion effect. It's not particularly difficult, and of course, the more you play, the better prizes that you can win. It's just a classic sort of staple of the series. It's pretty good here. It is worth noting that if you play as the baseball player, it is slightly more complicated. You have different power zones that you actually have to level up, so each button on the PS3 gamepad, circle, square, X, and triangle sort of correspond to a power zone. and, you know, you'll level up each button, which I didn't find to be particularly great. I just kind of like the old Kazuma game, which truly was a lot of fun, so definitely worth checking out. Check out the batting cages in Kamurocho. It's a very good time. Then you have this kind of Asian gambling hall, and I didn't really dabble in this too much in previous games. I believe it was there. Basically, it's in this, I think it's called Rio Goju. It's like a casino run by homeless people. And so one floor is Asian gambling games, the other floor is just sort of like Western casino games. And not having any sort of experience with any of these games, I found it to be very difficult. Now, granted, just like Mahjong, they do give you a fairly robust set of guides, but I think you're going to find this pretty overwhelming. So I'll show you a couple of the games and then move on. One of the games is Cee-Lo, and as far as I can tell, this is just people betting on the outcome of throwing 3 die into a pot, and you're sort of, you know, there are different number combinations that are worth different points. Didn't quite understand the nuance, although I do recall that in a previous Yakuza game, you actually had to win this game against somebody to get some item. Not particularly thrilling. Then you have Koi Koi, which is played with a deck of Hanafuda cards. Ton of different hands here. I wasn't exactly sure what I was doing. Again, they have a fairly long guide. I just kind of skimmed it for the purposes of this video. I guess you're matching picture cards, and they create hands like, you know, full glowing moon, blossoming spring, something like that. I would say this is the most interesting, and I actually would be interested in playing this with my Club Nintendo Hanafuda deck. But, yeah, I'm going to need to really read up on the rules. But as far as what was available in this gambling hall, this was my favorite of the games. Then I tried Cho-Han, which, as far as I can tell, was just a group of players betting on whether a dice roll would be odd or even. To me, this is like, you know, a pretty low-level, degenerate gambling type of game. It is what it is. Not really that thrilling. And lastly, I tried something called Oichi Kabu, which to me felt like a kind of Blackjack with Hanafuda cards. Again, didn't really have a ton of time to go through the instruction manual on this one. Wasn't as good as the other Hanafuda game, but, you know, like I said, it is what it is, and, you know, worth trying at least once. And then you have the Western-style casino. You know, they have Blackjack, Texas Hold'em Poker, Baccarat, Roulette, things like that. You know, very standard, I would say. I'm not a big poker fan, but, you know, so I couldn't really comment on how good of a version these poker games are. But, you know, I would say it's average and not really worth anyone's time unless you're, I guess, really into gambling video games. If you go into the bathhouse near the casino, you can play air hockey. Now, this is interesting because in previous games it used to be table tennis. But, yeah, this new air hockey game, it's kind of fun to a degree, but I didn't like the camera angle. So I thought, you know, I couldn't really judge where I was supposed to hit the puck. And, you know, you can kind of slow down time, and, of course, there's the zoom-in camera feature and all of that nonsense. But, yeah, I just think if the camera was rotated maybe more to a top-down kind of view, and then you had the cinematic cutscenes for the heat actions, it would have been better. Yeah, maybe if you spend a little bit more time with it, it's okay, but certainly not as good as bowling or the batting cages. Then, of course, you have karaoke, and I know there are a lot of people who like the karaoke minigames in the Yakuza series. I thought this was the hardest of all the rhythm games, and me being terrible at rhythm games, I didn't quite enjoy it. But, it has these funny cutscenes, and you can unlock different songs, so I suppose there's some value there if you like this kind of thing, but it just didn't do it for me. Then you have Pool, and Pool could have been great. But what I disliked about it was that there's not like one-to-one control between the right analog stick. So, you kind of input a shot, and then there's a pause, and the shot is executed. So to me, it really took me out of the experience. I don't particularly care for Pool. Now, one of the fun aspects of the Yakuza series is that eating and drinking is itself a kind of minigame. You're really incentivized to try all the different types of liquors and food, and they all give you experience that you can use to level up. And actually, in this game, there's kind of a roving chef, and if you try enough food and give him recommendations, he will actually kind of, there's a reward at the end of that. And again, you're leveling up more quickly and gaining some new abilities, and plus you're learning about all these different food products, which quite honestly makes me kind of hungry when I play it. So, don't overlook that aspect of the game. It actually, in its own way, is really a lot of fun. Now, unlike billiards, darts actually gives you kind of one-to-one control over where you're placing the dart, so that your throw is seems to be connected to the movement of the analog stick. That having been said, it is very difficult. It takes a lot of practice, as you can see here, playing a game of 501 and not doing so well, as you can see. You play against opponents who are actually pretty good, and you can rank up and play all different types of dart games. But, darts in real life are a heck of a lot easier, I think. But once you kind of get the hang of it and kind of get the feel, you can develop some accuracy. And so this is actually, I think, one of the better mini-games of the package here. Now, another interesting aspect of the Yakuza series has been this ability to go to Hostess Clubs, and this is a particularly Japanese thing. I've never understood the appeal of this. I guess you sort of go and pay tons of money to have women flirt with you and talk to you, and it's supposed to be relaxing and kind of like a party atmosphere. I don't understand why people would do this. It seems like an utter waste of money, but the Yakuza games give you this opportunity to kind of meet women and sort of as you go around town, you listen into people's conversations. Kiryu or Akiyama or whomever you're playing will basically say, "Oh yes, this is an interesting fact. I should bring this up at a hostess club." So it's basically kind of like a dialogue minigame where you're trying to read into what your hostess is saying and give a response that will please her, order different things on the menu to please her, and as you sort of increase her approval meter, she may go out with you at some point. I'm not sure what you gain by this. I never got into it too deeply. I do recall that and I think 3 or 4 I got to the dating stage, and basically in those games it was just someone to play these mini games against. So kind of silly, but a kind of quirky aspect of Japanese culture that has made its way into these games, and it's worth checking out at least once, just for the oddity of it, really. So yeah, can't really say that it's fun, but interesting and worth trying. Then of course you have Kiryu's career as a taxi driver, which is basically broken down into 3 kinds of activities. On the one hand, you're just driving your car and talking to passengers, and that will lead you to either learning something different about the game, or sometimes they'll just give you an extra tip for being nice. Oftentimes it leads you into a fight where you have to sort of fight on their behalf, and yeah, it's that part's just okay. Then, in some instances, you will get into a chase sequence or a race sequence, and basically you have, like one of those Tokyo Night Racer games, like on the Dreamcast. Really does feel like that. Controls are very arcade-like, and at different points you can build up a boost meter and boost, or a heat action behind the wheel, which is like explosive acceleration, and there's a whole series of missions where you're racing against like an outlaw race group or a group of elite female drivers and stuff like that. It's okay. Kind of an interesting portion of the game. I would say it's mediocre driving at best. And then, of course, you have the missions around town where you have to satisfy customers by driving safely and adhering to all traffic laws, watching out for, crazy pedestrians who will run in front of you, and while you're doing that, answer questions which correspond to different button inputs to make the customer as pleased with the conversation as possible. If you can do all that, you'll level up faster, you can get upgrades for your car, and you'll get a better tip. So this is, I would say, probably the most involved of the kind of mini games that you can play, and on balance, pretty fun. So I would, to a certain degree, you have to do some of these missions, but I would recommend going through the entire taxi mission structure because, you can get money, and you do meet some quirky characters, and of course, it's going to help you level up, and it's actually pretty unique, so it is recommended. Now we have a weird one. This is the Ramen Noodle Cooking Minigame, which is basically a puzzle game where you're cooking noodles to customers' requested consistencies. You're doing this because the owner of the shop throws his back out after a night of vigorous romance and needs your help quite often, so you do it initially and you can go back and try to reach the highest levels of customer satisfaction. It does get pretty frantic, and the key to being successful is associating the Japanese word for, dunk, very hard, soft, very soft, things like that. So you can hear the customer yelling, and then you can kind of anticipate, like, what are the next three consistencies. And that's very difficult to do. At a certain point, it just gets so fast that if you really aren't listening for those cues, you can't do well. But yeah, this is the type of game that you will only play in the Yakuza series. If that's not enough, we have fishing, and yeah, Sega has a long history of making fishing games that are actually kind of fun, or a lot of people think that they were fun. I never really got into the Sega fishing games, so I don't know how closely these mini games correspond to like Sega Bass Fishing, the arcade game, or something like that. But basically, you've got river fishing, and you can, catch whatever you can catch in the river, and when you do that, you can sort of then move to ocean fishing, which has some more kind of reeling mechanics. I didn't particularly care for this, but someone who's played the classic Sega fishing games, might think otherwise. Maybe this is a fairly good representation of those kind of late 90s, early 2000s classic games. So then you have a couple of games specific to Haruka, and they're mini games, sort of dancing games. This is the street battles, or the street battle minigame, and these battles are, I don't know, I found them to be more difficult than kind of your standard concert that you give. You kind of have to move. It's not just pressing buttons, but really moving the stick to the right, sort of, left, right, up, down, and then you have these heat actions that can knock down your health. I just set this to easy, and I can, get through them okay. Remember in the Japanese version when I I couldn't understand how to set it to easy. These were a real pain. But I guess they kind of help you level up more quickly in the Haruka storyline. Not great, but you may as well try them out. Now, this next game is what I love about Yakuza. I was just walking down the street, and this whole group of people descended upon me and wanted my autograph, and it triggered this kind of memory minigame where people would say their name, and then you would have a short amount of time to choose, which name to write on the autograph and match it up to what they said, and you will make them much happier if you obviously write their name down correctly. So I guess, I didn't find it too challenging, but they do some nasty, letter switching on you. Again, not fun, but it was just cool that this just, happened as I was walking down the street. Now, the dialogue minigame for Haruka is basically this, staging these interviews, and you have interviews with different people from different magazines, and you're trying to pick the answer that you think would please them the most, so they give you the most positive write-up, and that increases your sort of star power and stuff like that. They can be relatively amusing, but not a lot of fun. They're ultimately skippable, but if you hate the rhythm game aspect of the Haruka storyline, these are actually a nice way to kind of boost your popularity, rather than to just engage in dance battle after dance battle. Now, the core of the Haruka storyline involves these concerts, and so the concerts are mini-games, and I kind of found these manageable, and I really thank Sega for making them pretty easy to win on easy. Even me, with a kind of neurological block against, recognizing and responding to rhythm, I was able to kind of get through these. I didn't particularly like them. I know in the Japanese version, they were much more difficult kind of on the normal setting, so I can't really gauge how good these are as many games, but I did not particularly care for them, and boy was I thankful when they were over. Now, the one Haruka minigame that I actually thought was amusing was this Handshake event where, you have to please your fans by shaking their hand for as long as possible and then smiling at the bodyguard that tries to move them away, all while answering questions in such a way to, make them happy. So, each color of the question corresponds to a color of the response on the D-pad, and, it really is challenging to hold that hand for as long as possible, and some of the things they say are kind of goofy. To me, this is just, so quintessentially Japanese, and it was structured in this game in a pretty fun way. So I would say, definitely worth checking out. And of course, if you get the timing down, you can, again, level up your character and kind of get through that storyline by doing all of these and increase your popularity and appeal without having to do the dance battle. So I did, again, appreciate that Sega gave you other ways of leveling up than just dancing. So obviously, this amount of content is truly massive. And these are not all the mini-games in Yakuza 5. You can spend hours playing these games. Again, some are a lot of fun, some are mediocre, some are bad. The kind of leveling up that you get out of playing them, or the money, may not be absolutely ideal, but, it shows you that, the intricacy that was put into this game and the world that these minigames help create is truly, I think, spectacular. So definitely worth checking out all of these games. If you're not doing it, you're missing out on so much content here in Yakuza 5. Anyway, I thank you guys as always for watching Game Escape, and I'll be back shortly with another video.